Hey, everybody, it's Evelyn with Reppin. Thank you so much for being here. Look, no matter what the topic is these days, people are already in their camps. Culture, money, identity, and especially politics. Left, right, red, blue. Once you're in a camp, the other side isn't listening anymore. Republicans may know today's guest as the one who broke from his party, while some Democrats may just see him as a Republican. But on Reppin, I strip away all of those labels and see the human being, who they are, what shaped them, the character behind the choices they make. And that's exactly why I am so glad to have him here and why this conversation matters. My guest today is Adam Kinzinger, former Congressman, Air Force pilot, a man whose choices would put his career and his party loyalty on the line. But what was his breaking point? What was the red line he refused to cross? And what did it take not to break that? For Adam, that moment came on January 6th at the Capitol. That was the moment he drew a line in the sand, and he broke with his party, risking his career and taking the full weight of the backlash that followed. In this conversation, we talk about that moment, the pressure, the cost of standing by your values. Look, this isn't about political teams or politics at all. It's about character, conviction, and maybe looking at your own labels and your own beliefs and asking yourself, what would I risk for my principles? Would I be willing to stand alone? Adam Kinzinger, Breaking Point.
So I thought of it as like, at the time after January 6th, I was under the impression that the GOP, as most of the world thought, would be like, holy balls, we shouldn't have done that, right? And that's where I'm like, it was like waking up from just a crazy Friday night bender, and you're just like looking around like, oh, dude, there's half-naked people and chickens.
I think your politics.
Rough and rugged, represent NY, hold it down for my peeps. New York, New York, we rep the hardest, hardcore. Nobody harder. Let them know. That's the way we rock it. Show me what you got.
Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing good. Just every day it's something different, but otherwise, like the personal level, good. The world level, just, getting by.
Yeah, it's a little shaky right now. I am so excited that you're here. So thank you so much for your time. Let's start with your organization, Country First. You started this organization after January 6th. Tell me a little bit about the organization, why it was important for you to start.
Okay, so it's interesting. I started actually as a way, my idea was to save the Republican Party, right? When I thought there was hope. It became pretty clear that there wasn't. And also, the people that were joining, that were like kind of helping out and getting involved, were not Republicans. Some were, but a lot of like just Democrats that cared. And so it quickly became pretty obvious. One of the things that I've seen, I have a real like kind of passion about America's role in the world and about developing democracies. And one of the things I saw was that when you take away the trust in the political system, because that's like the only thing you have to actually agree on in a democracy, that's it. When you take that trust away, democracies will fail. We do a lot of democracy building overseas. Unfortunately, with all the USAID stuff, we don't see that as much anymore since that's been canceled. But we don't do it at home. So I kind of saw it as like democracy building at home, like reminding people. And what's been cool about it is, we have programs that are important, but it's amazing to watch people come together that maybe consider themselves a little more right, a little more left or centrist, and just having like good conversations where maybe they disagree, but they actually come out of that better friends. That for me was important, is just to be able to provide people an opportunity to recognize that like disagreeing is okay. And actually it's fun if you do it the right way. And we've got a whole bunch of like little sub programs in there, but the biggest thing for me is just like recognizing that democracy actually matters at home and bringing that back. So it's been cool. It's been cool to see.
It's vitally important. And I think you said something that's so interesting. Trust is really the pillar and the foundation of like everything. I don't care what you're doing, a relationship, a friendship. It's all about trust, and certainly in a democracy.
Yep.
Now, you have wonderful programs within Country First. You just started an initiative.
Yeah, Reveille and Rally, yep.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about that particular launch, what you're doing, and again, why this is important, because my understanding is, you know, the National Guard is really there to help communities and Americans that might be in trouble. And unfortunately, the times that we're in, I don't care what side you are on, everything is so divided and politicized and used as a weapon. Like, you could talk about what kind of salami you like, and people are just weaponizing that and making that political. Talk a little bit about this new initiative and what you're doing and why this specific avenue was so important.
So one of the things, like, as people kind of lose faith in government, you know, the different institutions crumble, right? I mean, 20 years ago, people had faith in the Supreme Court. They don't now. You know, 20 years ago, people had faith in the office of the presidency. They don't now. But the one thing that held was the military. You see like strong bipartisan support, and that's essential. So when I'm sitting in the Capitol on January 6th and, you know, I'm going through all these terrible things that could end up happening, the thing I knew is in the worst case scenario, the U.S. military could come in and restore order, because I trusted that they would do it for the right reason. And when you start to turn the military political, again, that becomes a massive problem in a democracy. And then specifically on the National Guard. So I served 22 years in the military as an Air National Guardsman. And even though I have two commissions, the Air Guard and then also the Air Force,
right,
I saw the importance of what the Guard is. And it's supposed to be service to the community. Yes, we go fight wars, and we've done that a lot in the last 25 years. You know, there's also the whole sandbagging thing, which is kind of just a broad way of saying, you know, rescue, helping the community in danger. And it's very much the last case scenario that the Guard comes out to restore order. It can be done in like riots, and you see times where that is. But this is obviously, in the last year, we've seen the Guard being used purely for politics. And it does a couple things. It strongly erodes what's supposed to be an organization that people have some real community roots and faith in. The chances are everybody listening knows somebody in the National Guard, and they probably live close to them, right? It's supposed to be that community connection. And so that's the essential thing, to keep that. And also to understand that, you know, the Guard is there when you deploy the Guard and you use it for things like ICE and you use it for things like crowd control when it's not necessary, you are actually burning out American citizens that decided to do this job because they want to help their community. You're taking them out of their civilian jobs, all right? You're using them as a political prop. And so that was part of this initiative, is just also to remind Guard members, but also to remind community members, what is the role of the Guard? And when the Guard is used inappropriately, there's a lot of second, third order effects and downstream damage. So I just think a lot of times people don't think a lot about the National Guard until it's in the news or they see a commercial. It's important for people to understand, here is the true role. We use the Minuteman soldier as our emblem. And the point in that is the Guard was really created in the 1600s as a militia to defend a community. It's still this kind of community service. And so that's what we want to really get out. It's just, again, it's restoring faith. We should actually see them as being there to help us. And unfortunately, it's become scary to some people.
I think that can be an understatement. Century, Adam. This is not a political episode or a series, but I want to kind of get to know you, because you kind of got thrusted into the limelight very much beyond your serving, you know, in Congress for 12 years, depending on, you know, which lens you're looking at for different reasons. You are a staunch Republican. You were the first, though, to step out and say, we need to impeach Trump and invoke the 25th Amendment. So in many ways, even back then, like we're talking like a few years ago, you became, unfortunately, a pariah of your own party. On the other hand, you know, the Democrats weren't very welcoming you as well, because you were a Republican. So I guess my question first and foremost is, I mean, I would imagine just watching that, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure. And to say that politics is in play, I think I'm not even fully aware of what that feels like. Can you talk a little bit about some of the decisions you made and why you decided to be the one to step out and quote unquote break from your party? Because from your documentary that I watched, which by the way was awesome, I really loved it, you said something that I wanted to kind of really focus on. You said there was not a doubt in your mind that it needed to be done. Like you needed to speak out. You needed to stick by what you believed in, which was that he needed to be impeached and the 25th Amendment needed to be invoked. Talk about that specific moment. Why were you so resolute? Like, was there no hesitation? Because Adam, like, I have no idea what you went through. So I guess give me a sense of what it felt like first.
Yeah, I mean, look, is there hesitation? Maybe a little bit, only in that you sit there and you have to kind of count the cost. I mean, you know, I was just married, and so it's like, what's the cost to her? What's the cost that, you know, I'm now going to be a massive public figure, not just a minor public figure. But I never really had a choice because I'm going to take you back to when I decided to run. So I made the decision to run, and I remember in my announcement speech, and I said it a few times after that, I'm like, and it sounded like a good line, but I meant it, which is, you know, I had just come back from Iraq like a couple months before I announced I was running for Congress. And so I still have fresh in my mind, you know, saluting caskets as they're leaving, you know, the base in Iraq and all that kind of stuff. And I just remember thinking, okay, I'm going to run for Congress and I'm going to be in a position where I'm going to vote to send people to war. I'm going to vote to outfit them for war, to build fighter jets, whatever. And I just remember thinking, if I'm going to be willing to do this job, to be willing to, you know, to make decisions on whether or not people live or die, then I have to be willing for the cause of the country to take a career-ending vote. We're asking young people, you know, 18 to mainly 30-year-olds, to be willing to, it's the end of their movie, right? It's the end of their life. And we talk about how important it is that we have people that are willing to put their life on the line for the country, and it is. But then we have politicians that are unwilling not to put their life on the line for the country, but just to lose a job because they may have to take a tough vote. And I was lucky in that I made that decision right when I ran. That stuck with me my whole time. And I often took positions against my party. I was never really on Donald Trump's side, even though I tried in the first administration to get along, but I would speak out when I needed to. And then that moment came where not just January 6th, but the election night when Trump comes out and says, frankly, the election is being stolen. And I just remember thinking, like, this is literally the kind of thing that we can look back in 5, 10, 20 years and say that was the moment this whole thing fell apart. And if we're going to ask an 18-year-old to be willing to die for the preservation of American democracy, I have to be willing to take a tough stand in this moment I've been given for the same cause. Another thing that stuck with me is I remember flying on an airplane once coming home, and I'm looking out the window, and I'm flying over some town, probably in Indiana, and it's nighttime, and I look out the little side window, and it's filled with just city, right? And I just remember thinking, I'm probably looking at 50,000 people. And I said, imagine picking one person out of all of that, and that was me, except the district I represent is 13 times at that. So now taking the amount of people I'm seeing, multiply it by 13 times, picking a random person, and that's me. That was my job representing these people in Congress. So I didn't have the moral right to just do what I thought was good for me. Not that I never did that, but in a case like this, and that stuck with me to that moment when all of a sudden, it was almost like God was preparing me for that tough decision. And I didn't have a choice at that point. I knew the cost was going to be hard. I knew that it was going to be like being in the middle of combat, but on a political level.
Yeah.
But I had no choice. I'm lucky in a way because it forced me to kind of keep my head down and stick with it. Because any other time, I think maybe I wouldn't have made that decision. I don't know.
Your passion and dedication to not just your values that you hold, but also to the country and democracy is so evident. Just listening to you speak here, like forget everything else that the billions of other places that you've talked. Let me ask you, where was that formed? Like, where did that love of country? Now, listen, I got to be honest with you. I saw pictures of you when you were like 5, wearing this like red onesie kind of thing. A lot of people, when they're kids, have like pictures of Rob Lowe, that's me, on their wall, and, Backstreet Boys or whatever. And you're holding a Bush and Quayle sign, like a good political nerd. So clearly your love of politics started when you were very young, but this passion and belief in democracy and, that's one part I want to kind of get to. Where was that formed? But more importantly, this fundamental and almost remedial lesson or truth of sticking to what you believe in, where did that kind of start?
It's interesting. So I'll start with the democracy side, and which is just, I was interested in politics because of the fanfare of it. I was like 6 years old, lived in Jacksonville, Florida. I see yard signs for a mayor campaign. And to me, that was kind of like, started talking to my parents, what's this about? They started explaining politics. And for whatever reason, that was exciting to me. This kind of like, parade fanfare, right? I didn't know anything about what the parties stood for. And I think that was the hook. And then obviously, once you're interested in the fanfare, you start to fill in the blanks. And then that goes to like, what is governance? What are some things that happen in government? And all of it just kind of took. And I got this real interest in government, politics, stuff like that. But part of that is just, you can have none of that without democracy. That morphed into an interest in, America's role in the world. Remember, Desert Storm happened in 91. I would have been 13 years old. And then, of course, 9/11, I was well into it. But, that stuff, I'm like, well, America, I still see, even in this day, as America's role in the world that we get wrong, and we're getting wrong now, but America's role in the world is to be an example of democracy and self-governance to billions of people that are desperate for it. And around that time, what else happened? The Soviet Union goes down. The Iron Curtain falls. I'm 13 years old watching people in the street crying and not understanding fully why, but recognizing that they lived under oppression for 3 generations. And all of that, instead of kind of off the back, like water over a duck, it just kind of stayed with me. And that built the interest in democracy and the stick-to-itiveness. Look, it's a combination of like, I really believe in this stuff and I want to fight for it. There is some stubbornness in it, right? Where if all of a sudden I'm fighting against people, in particular my own party, and I know they know better, there is a stubbornness in there that's like, well, screw you. I'm going to win this thing, right? I'm not going to let you turn me into a beta and just like, yeah, whatever's the easiest thing. But I also knew, for whatever reason, and I can't explain this, I wish I could. And I think Liz Cheney has a touch of this too, but hers is because of the family she was raised in. I do think about the second I got basically elected to Congress, like my role in history. I don't think there's going to be, volumes of books written about me, but I do think whether it's a footnote in a chapter or a chapter, my name will be mentioned, right? Particularly now with the January 6th stuff. And it's like, what do I want that to say? Now I have a kid. I have a 4-year-old son, and he is going to learn about January 6th in school someday.
Right.
And the name Kinzinger is not very common. I'm not going to be able to blend in. He's going to read about what I did. Do I want him to be proud or do I not want him to be proud? Do I want to be able to sit down with my son and talk about courage and what doing the right thing is? And then he looks at me and goes, yeah, well, you had a chance and didn't do it. And all of that kind of comes together. There are moments where people get an opportunity to, I'm not using the term heroic in a self-aggrandizing way, but to do something that is rare and most people don't actually do it. I got that chance, and it just, to me, was like, this is something I will be proud of the rest of my life, and I'm not going to regret. And I, by the way, have a lot of friends that didn't, in Congress that didn't stand up for what they believe, that I think are ashamed now. They're making tons of money, good on them, but there's a hollow point in them. So I don't know why, except that just years, there's little pieces of you that form to kind of create this Lego set that ultimately comes into play in something. Remember, what is it? The whole series, like the castles and like the guy Hodor. His name was Hodor.
Like Lord of the Rings?
Was it Lord of the Rings or was it the big castle one on HBO?
Man in the High Castle?
No, with the dragons and stuff. What is it? Yeah, I'm only trying to think of it. That's why I can't.
It's like Jon Snow, right?
Yeah, the Jon
Game of
Snow
Thrones.
one. Game of Thrones. I think it was Game of Thrones, where there's the guy Hodor. His name is Hodor. And then at one point, he's holding the door open to save this like civilization. And you get where his name Hodor came from, because he's like, hold the door, hold the door. And what you see in that is just something that is confusing. An 11, 12-year-old kid that is interested in politics is not normal. And then that culminates into something someday where you're like, there is this historic moment. I don't want to pretend like I never become cynical, because I can. I never want to pretend like I don't wake up some days and wonder if it was worth it, because I do, but that doesn't last very long, and I realize it was.
Okay. There's so many things that you have just opened up that I want to hit, but I want to kind of go back to the January 6th when you're sitting in there and you're one of I think you're just this one of two Republicans on the committee. The pushback you were getting, again, I know that you said there's no doubt that you needed to do it. Can you give me a sense of how intense the pressure was? I know there's no question what your North Star was, but you are a human being. You know what I mean? You're a human being. And sometimes being chewed out, I think with that white hot intensity that you must have been getting, day in and day out can break you down.
It's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you give me a sense of that?
It has taken me years still after I got out. I've been out a few years now, to really even come to the psychological damage that it did, or the trauma, I guess is the best word. I talk about in my documentary, I use the example of this. I read a book, and it's about a tank that survives World War II.
Yes.
And it's going through and just getting the crap kicked out of it.
Yeah.
And they're acting, boom, turning, shooting. And the battle's over. All the other tanks are destroyed. This survived. It's a true story. But then part of the story is about the damage of the tank crew, the psychological damage through the rest of their life. And I realized that applied to me, where it was like, okay, I had to go to this hearing, and then I had to do this thing, and I had to interview this witness, and I had to do that. So I was operating like I would in combat.
Just taking care of business.
Just taking care of business. And then when it was all over, you do realize, like, I felt more isolated. It was tougher for me to go outside. I've never been confronted in public by anybody, but I would still go to like the gas station and make sure I wore a hat so that nobody recognized me. And I don't do that as much anymore, but it took time to come through that. I mean, I had my co-pilot in Iraq at one point a couple years ago sent me a text saying he was ashamed to have ever flown with me. My dad's cousins send a certified letter saying I'm part of the devil's army and Donald Trump is a Christian, which makes me laugh every time. But it is constant, everyday pressure. Now, all of a sudden, your whole party apparatus, which you survived around in the job, has turned against you. And yeah, it's really, really hard. And, yes, I had good Democrats that would come up, my friends there, and particularly on the committee, that would say, thank you for what you're doing. You're doing a good job. But I knew they were feeling 1/20th of the pressure that I was. And not to mention, what does it do to a marriage? How tough is it? I was very self-absorbed during that whole time frame, to the detriment of my relationship with my wife, because my focus is, I've got to do this. I'm the one in the middle of this. And I didn't fully recognize she's in the middle of it too. And that's something, I've later had to work through. So yeah, the pressure is intense. And that's why every day you just had to kind of wake up and say, what I'm doing is historic. What I'm doing is right. What I'm doing makes sense. And and then just operate, just go through it every day.
That story of the tank is such a great illustration of what it must have felt like and what you're still going through, because that is an intense amount of processing that you have to do with everything that you've had to sustain.
And it's interesting because I still, sometimes if I'm telling a story or I'm talking about it, like out of nowhere, like just emotions hit, right? Like I get teary-eyed and I'm like, where does that come from? And anybody that's ever been through counseling knows that if you're a counselor and somebody just starts crying, that's a trigger point. And so you're going to sit there and explore that. And so I worked through that still. And not that I never had any of that baggage probably before any of this happened, but you don't have time to deal with it during. And so later you come to realize it's got an impact.
So what were some of the touch points and people you went to for either counsel, or was there somebody that said something that continued to help give you that second win? Because I know you had the resolve to stick through it. Getting that support from someone else sometimes does help that reinforcement and validation and recognition.
Yeah, there's a couple that I can think of specifically. I was raised in a very, I'll call it religious, but in a way it was almost semi-cultish religion until I was about high school time frame. These are the Baptists that you saw on Footloose.
Please tell me you can do that dance.
I can dance now, yes.
Okay, I need to see that later.
But, what that does, and this is a whole separate episode, but there's issues with religious trauma in terms of, unless you don't understand that God truly does love you, and, it's kind of this harsh environment. And anyway, part of that is what you see today in MAGA, which is this hard evangelical edge that has come to believe that Donald Trump is, a Messiah, right? Whether he's the Messiah, he's at least a Messiah. And when you leave a church, and, I'm still a person of faith, but I left that version of it. When you leave a church, you always deal with that guilt of, what if I'm wrong? What if I am doing the wrong thing?
Right.
And that especially was triggered when all of a sudden I'm now doing battle against 95% of people that claim to be self-professed Christians, right? And so the people that helped me through that were people like Russell Moore. Russell Moore is a pastor. He's the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today. He's taken a lot of heat. David French, right? These are people of faith that have taken a lot of heat for supporting Kamala Harris, for being against Donald Trump. Those were really important touch points for me, or people like them, where I could talk to them and say, look, I'm not alone. Because if all of a sudden you're the only person claiming that this is what God wants, is somebody to tell the truth, and you're the only one, then, that is like main character syndrome, where you then all of a sudden believe that God has picked you. And I don't believe that I'm the guy. And so I wanted to see that there were other people that were seeing this the same way. And even though it wasn't a ton, it was there. And that kind of helped me through those traumatic parts, which is like, am I really turning against my faith? Am I turning against God here? And I knew in my head that's not the case, but that doesn't mean that your heart doesn't have that feeling.
No, unfortunately, your brain and your heart sometimes don't really agree.
Yeah, that's
you
right.
can know something intellectually, but not feel it. And then that's a real bitch.
That is.
Let me ask you this. After everything that you've gone through, what have you learned about yourself?
I've learned that I am not as strong as I thought, in a good way, right? And what I mean by that is I'm not as self-sufficient. Like, I do need other people. Relationships are important. I've learned that I can be very self-centered, that in the middle of when I'm doing what I think is very important work, I become very self-focused and very tunnel vision, that there are other people around me, and that those other people around me are just as important. I think from the day I got out of Congress to today, I'm certainly not perfect, but I'm better at understanding that. I'm better at understanding that, it's when you get depressed is when you start shedding relationships and you start isolating. I was doing that in Congress because I felt I was in a way actually isolated, but I felt isolated. And I've learned that, that was my tendency, and to not do that, but I've also learned in a positive way that, like, I do have the ability to put my mind to doing something right and stick to it against all pressure. And that is a nice thing to know.
Yeah, I think that's been mildly, just mildly. When you were talking about this moment of understanding that you can be a little bit self-centered and you sometimes zero in on whatever it is that's in front of you, which is both good and bad, to your point. Do you remember the moment where that sort of crystallized for you?
I mean, I can think of a conversation I was having with my wife, and I don't remember the exact details except that she had made a point about basically, I was there, right? Like I was talking about the January, I don't know if it was actual January 6th, but like she said, I was there basically, and it hit me like she took a lot of damage along with me. And we weren't necessarily building the kind of team that could stand against that we should have. The other thing was the first time I watched the documentary, and she was talking about when I was, in essence, trapped in my office. I had left the floor of the house when I saw that stuff was happening. I made it back to my office in time. And I talked to her, and she was watching the television, and she said that was the first time I realized what it meant to be a politician's wife.
Yes.
And that one hit me square because I remember just in the theater, I mean, I start basically crying because I realized like she thought I was going to die. Right. And my thought at that moment wasn't about her and what she's thinking. It was about me and am I going to die? And that makes sense. But like you all of a sudden recognize she has whatever that trauma is too. And so I can think of those specific moments. And it's funny because when you go through really dark times, you never want to go through them, but you could, I don't know anybody that's gone through dark times that has come out the other end and said, I like the person I was before the dark time. Most people recognize that through that they become better people. And I can say
you mean through the dark times?
Yeah.
That they become better after?
Yep.
Okay.
You become a better person after, right? You learn how to handle adversity. You learn things about yourself. Now, some people don't. Some people come out of dark times and they've turned to alcohol or whatever. But in my case, I can say I've come out of that and I'm a better person today than I was. And I hope in 3 years, I'm a better person than I am today.
I think that's very healthy to do. And you're right. Not everybody does come out of dark times healed. Sometimes people just get stuck. Now, you bring up a good point about you being in the building during January 6th. When you're running to your office and for safety, what was going through your brain? Like, can you believe this was happening? And did you understand the damage or the decay of democracy at that point?
I did, actually. It's interesting because at that moment, I realized like I remember thinking, this is going to be a day in the history books like 9/11 was. Doesn't mean it's as violent, but it'll be as consequential on some things. I remember I thought in my mind, I'm like, this is a coup attempt. And I think it was. Yeah, the United States has never really had a coup attempt, save for the Civil War. And I mean, I go back to my office, and this was also the first day I ever took my gun with me to the Capitol. We were allowed to as members of Congress, and I never did. And I did this day. And I go back to my office, and I pull my gun out of my desk with like, I may have to defend myself here. So yeah, I mean, everything going through my head is like, if you've seen a car crash or if you're old enough to remember 9/11 and you remember watching the towers come down and it didn't seem real, I remember watching the towers come down and just thinking like, oh yeah, okay, of course they came down, an airplane hit them, but not understanding how serious that was that towers came down. It was kind of like that where I'm sitting here processing that it's happening. I know the historical implications, but emotionally I haven't caught up. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. I stand up, I'm sitting behind my desk, and I talk to my wife, and behind my desk is a window that actually looks on the west front of the Capitol, which is where all the stuff was happening that you saw. And I remember opening that door. I turn around, I open the window, and I hear boom, boom, bang, pop. And it was exactly at the moment that DC Metro showed up in force, which they actually saved the Capitol. And they used all their non-lethal munitions. So all of a sudden these flash bangs and tear gas and everything's going out. And I just remember and I've never sensed this in my life before, ever. And not before or not since. But there was just this feeling of like evil and darkness that I cannot describe that just overwhelmed me. I'm not one of these people that has ever felt that before. But all I can describe is just, it didn't get any darker, but it felt extremely dark at that moment. That's not something I can explain. You know, people that don't believe in any kind of spirituality will say it was a psychological thing, and it may have been. If you believe in spirituality, it may have been just pure evil. I don't know, but I felt something. And that was the moment too that also hit me like, this is a very serious day.
There's so many things that you said, like, you know, breaking from party lines. You said something on the film, again, your documentary. You said some red lines you can't cross. Now, again, this is not about Republicans versus Democrats. Part of this podcast for me is it's always about seeing someone based on their actions and not what they are categorized as. And that is certainly applicable in political conversations. Yep. When you talk about holding the red line, not crossing the red lines, as an American citizen, I'm just looking at like, there's so much division and hate that we're not listening to learn, we're listening to respond. And we have to, that there's got to be some bottom or threshold. That's a better word, threshold, that people, our representatives, are going to like hit and stick by. And so far, Democrats and Republicans, people of all of both parties, are not, I don't know, we're not seeing that line. Yeah. For you, you have said, okay, this, like January 6th is a whole gang of crazy. And let me just quote you. You compared January 6th to like The Hangover, with chickens flying every which way, wearing like a dirty wife beater. I don't know if I would categorize it as a hangover. I would kind of categorize it as like some sort of drug-induced fever dream.
Yeah.
Why are people like kind of finding this red line?
Yeah. So I thought of it as like at the time after January 6th, I was under the impression that the GOP, as most of the world thought, would be like, holy balls, we shouldn't have done that. Right. And that's where I'm like, it was like waking up from just a crazy Friday night bender. And you're just like looking around like, oh, dude, you know, there's half naked people and chickens. And you're like, I'm never doing this again. Right. But like I said, you can start drinking again right at that moment. And next thing you know, you're back in. And that's what we did. I don't know. I mean, I think we've crossed so many red lines. There's so much psychological stuff behind it, which is we've now made, which I think is the dumbest thing in the world. We've made our identity our political affiliation. And so now all of a sudden, if somebody goes after one side, it becomes personal. When in the past, it wasn't personal. Well, I'm going to say that, I think mass violence would be a red line. I hope. I think. Yeah. I also think that just when one side loses a huge amount of power after having it, and without getting political, if that happens in 2 or 3 years, I'm hoping that that's a moment where people are like, yeah, maybe we need to course correct. But ultimately the thing in government is this, and I've learned this, which is politicians will not lead the American people. Politicians will do what will get them voted. It will get them elected. And if the American people want fighting and blood and whatever, that's what they're going to get. If the American people want folks to work together, that's what they're going to put in place. And so it really does start at the ground level.
I'm just not seeing any of that right now.
I'm not either.
You know?
But again, just for a moment I think things are not going well enough right now that potentially there could be a course correction from just losing political power. But that's the best thing I can hope for.
There's also an underlining theme of betrayal, or maybe that's too strong of a word, being disillusioned by things that you believe in. And I think in 2 points, I've noticed this is, again, you've been a lifetime political geek, always with the Republicans, and that's always been your party. And they essentially ostracized you, and then also your friendship you had a genuine friendship with Speaker of the House, Kevin, and he did not stand by you. He actually ostracized you. So both with your party, and you spent your whole life believing in these values that aligned with, I'll use the word traditional Republican definition, and also on a personal level, your relationship with former Speaker of the House. In both cases, for me, when I had a deep friendship with someone and all of a sudden something happened and I was like, who is this person?
Right.
I felt a real sense of loss and grief and disorientation because I thought I knew somebody, because I spent so much time with this person and believing. So in both cases, both with your party and also with your former friendship, can you talk a little bit about what that was like and what you walked away with?
Yeah, there's a bit of mourning. And the thing is it's like Kevin specifically, it hurt, but that was in the middle of me having so many friendships torn apart. And so all of that kind of is jammed together in this mass experience of like my whole social circle is evaporating.
Right.
And what I eventually came to realize is like, and they always warned us in politics, they're like, the people you think are your friends aren't. A few are. And thankfully I was able to gravitate to real friends. I have this small group of people I served with that were still really good friends. They all actually agree with me on the politics. The guys I flew with in the squadron still, I had a few times I had to shut them down from talking about politics, but we are still genuinely good friends. So you gravitate towards those. But there is a real sense of loss. But as much as anything, it's disappointment too in Kevin McCarthy, because I thought better of him, right? And I know he knows better. I mean, he's told me he knows better. On the party side of it, the thing that helped me with that is I don't believe that the current day Republican Party is conservative or is even a shadow of its former self. I think it is now a party, and you see this in like countries that are former Soviet republics, for instance, where they put up political parties that don't believe in anything except a certain person that started that party. And that's what I see in the GOP. So I just look at that and I'm like, they have gone off the rails on it. Like, I don't think the Republican Party I remember exists in any form now, which is why I haven't voted Republican in 4 years. I voted Democrat the last 4 years because I don't think the GOP exists. But it is more, to me, it was more of a battle of like, instead of, yes, disappointment, but also just like trying to come to terms with how other people, how the human condition can allow people to morph so easily into different things. That's what my biggest struggle was like, how is it that Kevin McCarthy, a guy who I thought believed in what he could become, what he became, how is it that everybody in the GOP could become what they became? Because I used to think, and I don't anymore, I used to think that everybody had an internal moral compass. And then when you recognize that they don't, it is eye-opening. And it also is a good reminder to all of us that we have to be that moral compass, because most people, I'm sorry, I wish they did, they do not have it. That's why leadership is important.
There's so much there, but here's my thing. Like, okay, yes, the moral compass. You are so strong with that. Do you know if that's like something your mom beat into you? Not literally. Or your dad? What was it? Because I think for me, my parents were immigrants and I was born here. So they literally, always said, keep your head down, shut your mouth and do your best, because that's what you're supposed to do. Like, don't do it for any other reason. For lack of a better word, and also because caffeine is leaving my body right now, I can't think of another word in terms of, but backbone. Where did this backbone and resolve to, despite, you being the tank and getting the absolute shit kicked out of you day in and day out 10 times a day, you still rolled on. And yes, you came out of it and you're different and you're battered and you have scars. But where is this resolve and this backbone of Adam? Where was that from?
I think it's a little bit of, if I have to take anything good out of the strict religious thing I was raised in at the beginning of my life, it is, they were always there is black and white. There is good and evil. There is right and wrong, right? And so that is kind of put in you. Although, again, the interesting thing is they don't know what right or wrong is. But
That's part two for our conversation.
Yeah, exactly. My parents would talk a lot about right and wrong. So that was important to lay the foundation to even understand what it is. But I really do think, and if it was divinely inspired or not, the fact that once I decided to go into politics, I had incorporated into everything I said, basically that I have to be willing to do the right thing, even if it cost me. I took a number of votes against the wishes of the party. I remember, I'd vote for the Violence Against Women Act, which for whatever reason the Republican Party would oppose. And I'd always be one of 3 people to vote for it. And those are actually the votes you're most proud of, the time you go against the party. But I think it was my conscious decision to always anticipate a moment in which I would need to stand alone. That's, I think, a lesson for anybody, even if you never go into politics. Everybody will face a moment in their life, and you may have already faced one, where you will have to stand alone against pressure, whether it's at work, whether it's in a social circle, whether it's in your family. And I think the more we can kind of practice that we will be willing to do it when that time comes, even if you don't know what it is going to be, I think it makes it more likely that you are willing then to do that. The more you can, it's like, cops always say they sit in their living room at night and they dry fire their guns. So they take the bullets out and they draw and pull, draw and pull, draw and pull. And it's like, the more you do it, then if you ever see a police officer when they need to draw their weapon, they're like lightning fast, right? Yeah. You're like, whoa. And it's because they practice. And moral decisions, I think, are no different than things like pulling your gun or swerving to not hit a child. I think it is all part of preparing your brain to make a tough decision when that comes.
As a father, in light of what's going on right now, forget like Congressman Adam Kinzinger. As a father, as Adam, that's going to go grab a beer. I don't even know what kind of beer you like. Light, ale, pale? Which one?
I'm kind of into, I was just in Scotland and I'm on a British, Irish, Scottish beer thing right now.
Oh, is that like wheat?
Yeah, no, it's like more the nitrogen infused because it sits really easy.
I'll have to
you don't get all
check that
full.
out.
Yeah, go get like Boddingtons, or it's like kind of the consistency of like Guinness. Yeah.
Oh, that's like having a steak for me. That's a little too much.
I don't know. Try a Guinness. Just take my word for it, because it's actually less calories than a Miller Lite. People are prejudiced against Guinness because it's dark. It actually is a very light beer. So try it.
All right,
next time.
I'll check it out and email you.
Okay, yeah, let me know.
As a father, now that you look at your son, and also as someone who loves this country, and based on what is happening at the moment and continues to pick up speed, do you still believe in America, the people? And when you look at your son, like, what are you thinking after everything that you fought for?
Do I still believe in America and the people? Yes. But I don't want to just I want to be very honest here.
Yeah,
and
please.
Yes, I believe in it because I know that if I just use history as a guide, there have been points we've been in very dark places and we've always come out stronger. And I do believe that is going to happen. Now, my belief in America, where it was a little more automatic, like somehow we were inherently born with this goodness, I don't know if I have that anymore as much. But I do think we still have, self-governance is the best form of government. I think ultimately we will get it right. So I still am optimistic and I still believe in what we have, but I believe it is not automatic now. That's probably the best way to put it. I do believe in what we have. I just don't think it's automatic anymore.
Fair.
And when I look at my son, what do I think about? We've never had a generation that's left another generation, a country worse off. We've always left the country better off. That's, morally in a better spot. Even through the Civil War, we've come out of that and a whole race of people are out of chains. So we're in a better moral position. I worry that we're going to be the first to leave in a country worse off. And I worry about that. And, when I see what the world thinks of America now, I used to take so much pride in the fact that the airports would be stuffed with people coming from around the world just to come to the United States. And now you don't see that. So I'm a little disheartened, if I'm being honest, about this kind of miracle of America situation. but I think it'll be restored again. And I'm just worried my son is going to be raised in a country that's not. And that's why I guess I keep fighting. Otherwise, I'd give up and go fly airplanes because that's my favorite thing to do.
And have a Guinness.
Yeah, and just drink and fly.
Yeah, man, I'm all about that. But for you, going back to the tank analogy, after taking your hits, what's the one lesson you are going to take forward and apply in your life, like beyond politics, that you've learned about yourself?
I think the lesson, if I have to just think of like, what have I learned from myself from that, is like, I can take a lot of hits. Like I can stick to what I believe, but I also should not do it alone. And I don't need to, right? Incorporate my family into this stuff more. That doesn't mean that I need to allow them to take the hits with me. My job as a dad and a husband is to shield them from that, but also recognize they're there to help. And the importance of friendship, right, in all of this, and not isolating yourself. But I'll be honest, I'm also, I'm going to wait a potato or two and think it through before I decide whether to just engage in some fight, right? Because I know the cost now. The cost is very real. I may run for office again someday. I may not. Like, I don't feel that need to feel complete by running for office anymore like I used to. I feel like a more complete person. Like, I feel like politics is not necessary for me to be me. So yeah, I guess that's kind of what I can take away from that, but I still think I have a lot of growing to do. I hope I have a lot of growing to do because I'm not fully happy with who I am as a person, and I want to be better.
You know what? That's fair. And I have to say, just from my own school of thought, I worry about people who think that they don't have any more growing to do, regardless if you're 150 or you're 5 years old. So I really appreciate your candor and most of all, your humility, Adam.
Thank you. And I just want to add to that though, too. One of the other things I want to be able to do better is just to embrace the moment I'm in. Because I do realize in a political life, it's always about what is the next thing? What are you going to do next? And that's fine. That's understandable. The key is not to let yourself live in that what's next moment, but to appreciate the moment, to embrace that. My kid is 4 years old. He'll never be 4 years old again, right?
Gotcha.
It's that. Yeah. So I think that's
just remember
important.
this when he steals the car and burns the house down.
I know.
Just remember this. I'll send you the clip to play on your phone.
Perfect.
But you have no regrets doing what you did, right, for January 6th. Okay. So listen, I need you to come back in the future. Would you come back in the future?
Yeah, for sure. This was great. I loved it.
Okay. So listen, I ask all of my guests to do our signature sign-off. Will you let me know who you are and what you represent?
I'm Adam Kinzinger, and I represent justice. How about that?
A huge thank you to Adam Kinzinger for sitting down with me, for sharing his stories, and for his service to this country. Politics aside, left, right, if you're blue, you're red, if you're conservative, liberal, Adam has been consistent with his messages, and he's backed it up with his actions. The risks he took, the pressure he faced, the sacrifices he's made to stand by his values, that takes courage. If you want to see the work he's doing now, check out his organization, Country First. Those links, plus Adam's social handles, will be in the show notes for you. If you love this conversation, be sure to subscribe, share, download episodes of Reppin, and leave a review. You can also follow me on Instagram at Reppin_podcast and check out more clips on YouTube at Reppin Podcast. Thank you always for being here, for listening, and for your time. I'm Evelyn. Reppin is a Suburban Outlaw Productions. Until next time, stand up and represent.
I make no apologies.
Rough and rugged. Represent NY, hold it down.